Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Diamond Net, and today I'm going to be talking to you about enlightenment. Alright, so what enlightenment is basically waking up to your own true nature and realizing what you are as being beyond all of your thoughts, concepts, and assumptions that you place upon reality. So what I mean by waking up to the reality of what you are, it is realizing that the person that you think you are is not you. So for example, my name's Emerald, I have a YouTube channel and I like to do X, Y, and Z things, and I know how to paint, and I have all of these other concepts that I've stacked on top of myself, and I think, oh, I have this disposition, these mannerisms, and I basically have this self-concept in my mind that I then apply as a label to myself, and this is how I come to understand myself in daily life. And of course, this can have some practical benefits. It could help me realize what my preferences are and, a lot of other things that are just good for just practical life. But the reality of the matter is that all of this is just an approximation, and it's a concept and a framework that I've placed over the real thing. And the reality behind every single human being who's going through the world thinking that they are this person with this name and these dispositions is that underneath that, we are part of nature. So we have a tendency to go about life thinking that we're this separate person, kind of interfacing with other separate people and objects. But the fact that we think of ourselves as being delineated or separated in any way from everything else, that's the illusion. The reality of the matter is that just because we have this body does not mean we're separate. In fact, if you start to wake up to what's really in your reality, you will see that you are not your body and you are not your mind, but you are the container for all of the experiences in your own reality. Now, on a more practical level, you want to steer your body and your mind in ways that are going to be beneficial for you. So you don't want to completely chuck out your thought story, but you want to change your relationship to it. That's what enlightenment is. It is changing your perspective in relation to your ego. So your ego is your self-concept. It's the thing that you think you are, and you think of it as this very center of your experience. It's sort of like how for thousands of years we thought that the earth was the center of the solar system, and then we come to realize that the sun is actually the center of the solar system, but there's so much more out in space beyond that. There is this vast, infinite thing that you are that you cannot understand through thoughts and beliefs. So it's not accessible through thoughts, but it's absolutely accessible through experience. You can experience yourself firsthand as that thing. And so as I'm sitting here telling you about enlightenment, just understanding this conceptually isn't going to get you an actual experience of enlightenment. Now, for me, my background is I've had 2 enlightenment experiences. Not that enlightenment is an actual experience, it's a realization. We're not a permanent thing, so I still very much think of myself as a separate person. But having woken up to the realization that basically Emerald isn't real and the self that I think I am is not real, to the rational mind that sounds very scary because we're used to thinking of ourselves in this way. And we have thought that this is what brings us significance. It's our uniqueness as an individual. It's these thought stories about ourselves that create worth in us. And beyond those, we don't even know what kind of significance there could be. You're basically, saying that it sounds to the ear like you're invalidating that. So enlightenment is waking up to the truth that you are not the self that you think you are. You are not the small self. I am not Emerald. I am the container for all of reality. And I am also an integral piece of the entire universe. And that is actually what my YouTube channel name means. The Diamond Net is basically It's a Buddhist concept, and the Hindu god Indra is said to have this vast, infinite net that goes on forever and ever in every direction. And at each of the vortices of that net, there lies a jewel, and in each of those jewels is reflected all of the other jewels in the net, which are also infinite in number. And so, in many senses, we are the one jewel, but because that one jewel reflects all the other jewels in the net, we are also all of the jewels in the net. And so it's realizing our own infinite nature cased within this finite experience. So where do we begin looking for this real self of ours? Where do we begin if we're saying that all of what we think of as ourself is just a thought story? Where is it in our experience that we find this real self? Well, what you want to do is you want to get really, really present to what you're actually experiencing in the present moment. Don't get caught up in thoughts. And so for this, I'll create an analogy to something that's very familiar to me and that maybe is familiar to you if you've ever had an art class where you're learning how to draw something realistically. So going into my high school art class when I was 15 years old, I didn't know how to draw. And so when I would look at things like if I were to look at a chair or if I were to look at a camera or if I were to look at a person's face, I would have a concept, an idea in my mind of what that actually looked like. And so I would just put down on paper what it is that I thought that the chair looked like. But because the chair is basically a label that I've put over my experience of a chair, which practically works a certain way, doesn't mean that I'm going to get a realistic looking chair. Instead, you want to see what it is that you actually see in order to be able to draw and paint well. So you want to paint the chair and its surroundings as just shapes imbued with colors. So basically every single thing that you look at, if you change your angle or anything like that, it's going to look different. If the light shines on it differently, it's going to look different. If you're up high, it's going to look different. And so visually, it's an illusion to think that a chair looks just one way, when in reality, it's just a collection of shapes and colors on a flat screen. And when you start looking at it as shapes and colors on a flat screen, you can then see more realistically what the chair is. And when you see it, then you can start to translate it and come up quite possibly with a more realistic looking drawing. So the idea is you're turning off the symbolic mind and you're beginning to see things as they are. So you want to turn this exact process inward on the self-concept and on your concept of reality in order to deconstruct what you think you know about yourself. Because it's what you think that you know about yourself that keeps you from having a breakthrough of enlightenment. Now, before I go much further, I want to say that enlightenment is a paradigm shift. So it's basically like it can be a really, really quick, all of a sudden kind of experience where it's just like you just see it and you can't unsee it. Just like when I was learning how to draw, it was like once I saw things as shapes and colors, you can't unsee it. So what our experience is actually consistent of are 6 things plus awareness. So the 6 things are our 5 senses. So we have sight, smell, taste, touch, and feeling. And feeling also includes emotions, which are basically influenced by our thoughts. And then we also have thoughts. And we tend to think that those things are all tied together and being perceived by a self. We kind of get this sense that there's like this internal person inside of us, maybe our soul, or maybe for somebody who doesn't believe in a soul, maybe like the mind perceives of those things. And we are thinking that all of these perceptions are being perceived by this internal person. It's usually thought of as somebody like behind the eyes or in the mind somewhere. And that's actually not true. There's no self to be found in any of those sensations. And there's no self to be found in the thoughts. A lot of times people will think that they are their thoughts. Thoughts are just another sensation, another perception that come into the field of awareness. So we have our 5 senses and we have our thoughts. Those things are being perceived by the same awareness. But the awareness isn't inside of our head. And the awareness isn't coming through our eyes or any of our other sense perceptions. Our awareness just is. And it's the awareness that we're waking up to realizing that we are. And it's very, very difficult to actually see yourself as awareness because we have so many ideas that, oh, I'm seeing through my eyes. That's an assumption that we have. Now, it's backed up by science on the more practical level and on the scientific level. But if you're looking to have an enlightenment experience, you have to get rid of all beliefs and assumptions, because the idea is that there's a giant illusion going on here, thinking that there's concrete reality to the experience that you're experiencing, and thinking that these labels are real. So I had an earlier video about becoming aware of beliefs, and this very much relates to enlightenment work. So think about, if you're not experiencing the sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, or thought in the present moment, then it is a thought story. It's the content of a thought. And you want to differentiate the thought itself from what you're actually thinking of. And that's one of the things that we have a problem with. We get conflated and we think that our thoughts are real. Now, in a sense, our thoughts coming up, they're a real thing that comes up in our reality as a sensation, as a thing that's there. But the thought story we get caught up in. You know, we get caught up in the content of the thought and we start thinking it's true or it's not true. But the reality of the matter is that all of the content within your thoughts is inherently untrue, because it's not something that's happening in the present moment. It's a abstraction placed over the reality and an anticipation of the future, or maybe remembering back to the past or some other imaginary present moment. But getting caught up in the content of the thought is going exactly in the wrong direction. And this is exactly why my telling you about enlightenment isn't necessarily going to yield an enlightenment experience, because essentially you're getting caught up in thought stories, and thought stories can never understand the true nature. It can try to rationalize things and it can try and come up with an answer for who you are, but it will never get there. You can only experience it in the present moment in what you're sensing. So look at your visual field. So this is what the visual field is consistent of. It is only what you're seeing right now in the present moment, and it's only a flat screen of shapes imbued with colors. There's no depth to the visual field. We think of our reality as three-dimensional because our tactile sensations are three-dimensional, but the reality is that our visual sensations are very much flat. This is why painters and people who draw can actually depict things realistically. So you have that, and everything that's outside of your field of perception right now is the content of a thought. Now, you don't know if it's real or if it's not real, because essentially, if you're not looking at it, you really don't know. So you want to get into that state where you don't know. When it comes to sounds, you probably can hear things here and there. You hear my voice, or maybe you hear some background noise. Maybe there's a dog barking, and you think of those things as separate from one another and you can label them. But the reality of the matter is that they're just all one sound hitting your eardrums. So there's nothing that actually delineates the dog barking in the background and the lawnmower going in the background from my voice. It's just your conceptual understanding, and your trained ear can actually pick those things apart. And so remember, it's only what you're hearing right now in the present moment. Same thing with taste and smell. Probably right now, unless you're eating something, those two things are probably kind of more subtle, but you can still experience them. And when it comes to what you're feeling, notice that what you're feeling doesn't actually correspond necessarily to what you're seeing. So you have your sight. Let's say I'm touching my hand to my other hand right here, and I'm seeing that there's a correlation between me touching my hand right here and the feeling that I'm having, but that it isn't necessarily a causation. You know, the correlation is created by my thought that, oh, this corresponds here. And there's actually a problem in philosophy called Molyneux's problem, where Molyneux was wanting to know if a person had been blind for their entire life, and let's say that they were to touch a sphere and a cube, and they got a good sense of it tactily, then if all of a sudden they could see again, would they be able to point out the sphere and the cube? And it was determined that they could not, because they weren't used to having the connection between their tactile sensations and their visual sensations. So that's another way that our assumptions and our past experiences color our experience. And probably most importantly, you want to realize that you are not your thoughts and that you don't have control over your thoughts. So your thoughts are just something that bubbles up into your field of awareness. The thoughts just kind of come up, and they're either related to something going on or not related to something going on, and it feels like you can direct them in particular directions. But notice how it's an automatic process. You really can't stop your thoughts. And the mistake that a lot of people make is that they think that they are their thoughts. They think that their thoughts are the thing that's perceiving everything that's going on with the sense perception. And then the thoughts think that they're perceiving of themselves. So basically, you want to understand that your thoughts are just another sensation that comes up, just like your tactile sensation, just like your visual thing. It's just another thing that comes into your field of awareness. And it doesn't mean anything about you, and because the thought story that we tell ourselves about ourselves are just in that particular realm of perception, there's nothing really real to it. It's just the perception. It's just a perception of the content of the thought. And so when you can realize that you are just the empty space that all of these things occur in, and you can really get a first-hand experience of that in reality beyond the concepts that I'm telling you, that's when you can become ripe for a breakthrough of enlightenment. And so enlightenment is basically this all of a sudden waking up, and a lot of times people will have an experience where they're like, oh, I see it now. I can see that I'm not just this small person inside of my body, inside of my mind. I'm not my thoughts, but I am the totality of everything that there is in my existence. Because essentially, thinking that you are this small person in this infinitely large universe, that's nothing that you can actually experience in your reality right now. It's a story that you've been told. You've been told that you're a small person and that the universe expands on and on forever, and that our Earth is just a tiny dot in the sky, and our sun is even just a tiny dot in the sky, and that basically how small we are and insignificant we are. And it is a possibility that that's true, but understand that you've never perceived of that yourself. You've only ever been taught things and shown frameworks that imply that. You want to start to shift your perspective to thinking, maybe I am the actual container for all of reality. Maybe there is nothing beyond what I'm perceiving right now. Or if there is, I don't know it. So you want to keep an open mind. So it's not like solipsism where you're like clinging on to, oh yes, I'm the only person in existence and screw everyone else kind of thing. But you want to entertain the notion that you very well could be the complete and total container for all of your subjective reality, and that you are just basically the awareness that all of that happens within. And that awareness has been called many, many things over the course of the ages. But the idea is that there is this thing that's constantly behind our own awareness, that our awareness springs from, that we are unconscious of, and it's making that conscious. It's accessing that thing in our first-hand experience, and that's what enlightenment is. And enlightenment also has many, many benefits, which I'll go into in future videos. I know when I had my experiences, like all fear went away from me, because I realized that I was this infinite thing and that nothing could harm me, and that this small person that I had been thinking that I am, this emerald person that I have so many attachments with, essentially wasn't even wasn't real, in the sense that the thoughts that I was thinking about myself are me, but that really the reality of me is so much more expansive than that. And so it was the most peaceful experience that I'd ever had, and I was really in a state of just complete acceptance and allowing of everything in existence. because I realized that everything was perfect. And from this particular paradigm, it's this realization, it's this waking up and seeing the perfection in all of the world, and realizing that you're both an important part of that whole thing and that you are the whole thing itself. And so it really was an amazing couple of experiences for me. Not that enlightenment is an experience, it's really a realization in a way that you can come to live your life if you can have that paradigm shift. But that's basically what enlightenment is. And other than that, that's all I have for you. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and click the like button below, and go ahead and you can subscribe too. If you're interested in my personal spiritual journey, I also write a blog at thediamondnet.org, and there I go just in a bit more detail with like what I'm going through in my own spiritual life, and sometimes I add in stuff from my practical life and psychology too, so you can check that out. And other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and until next time, keep becoming more you.